Ignore the breakdown. Hey everyone, I'm Matthew Cornwall with Get Taped here in Atlanta, Georgia, one of Atlanta's original audition taping services, which I co-own with my amazingly talented, beautiful wife and best friend, Brooke. Looking good, honey. And now on to our topic. Ignore the breakdown. Kind of. First of all, we covered this topic in a video that we posted a couple years ago on this channel, and I actually just watched it before recording this, and there were some pretty good nuggets that I came up with back then. That's awkward for me to say. But today I want to approach it from a different perspective, to hopefully shine a light on a dangerous tendency we can all develop as actors. And to start, let's get nerdy for a second. As humans, we all crave what I'll call initial conditions, or barriers, or boundaries. Now, I did my undergraduate and graduate studies in engineering, specifically acoustics. And when you're doing big, complicated, sciencey problems, you always start with your initial conditions. For example, what are the variables? What are the constants? Are we ignoring friction in this problem? What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? Okay, enough with the nerd talk. In life, we also crave these initial conditions, these boundaries. And there's a great example that I want to use that really works as an analogy for this argument. There was an experiment done years ago that I either read about or heard about on a podcast, where these experimenters set up two identical playgrounds. The equipment was exactly the same, the layout was the same. The only thing that was different about these two playgrounds was that one of them had no fence around it, and the other one did have a fence. So they let loose two groups of kids on these playgrounds and then asked the kids afterwards what their experience was like. Turns out, the playground that had no fence, the kids didn't have as good of a time. They didn't report being as creative. They didn't explore as much. They stayed closer to the equipment and closer to their parents. Whereas the kids who had a boundary around the playground, they reported having more fun, being more creative, exploring the entire property and not just sticking to the equipment or not just sticking close to their parents. Fascinating. So the takeaway is this, that when we're given boundaries, not just as kids, but as adults, we're able to explore everything within those boundaries. When we're not given those boundaries, we tend to hold back. It seems a little bit more confusing or a little bit more uncertain. But when you have boundaries, you can actually be more creative. You can explore more. It almost feels like a paradox. But the more you think about it, the more you'll realize it's true for you. And so I think that's why, as actors, we crave the information that is in the character breakdown. And while that seems fine based on my argument about the playground, it's what we do with that information that determines our fate, if you will. So let's talk about the dangers of putting too much emphasis on the character breakdown. The first major trap is assuming that that breakdown is still accurate. Now, I won't go into all the nuances of this because I did cover it in the previous video that we posted on this topic. But suffice to say, most of the time, the information in that breakdown is old. It is outdated. The physical information, it wasn't even meant for you, the actor, to see to begin with. That's meant for your agent to determine which of their actors on their roster fits the character visually. But by the time it even hits your inbox, it might be old news. So you shouldn't even be paying attention to the physical part of that breakdown. Now, the character traits also might be outdated. So by placing so much importance on something that might not even be accurate, you're falling into a trap. But let's say that that breakdown is still accurate. They have not updated it behind the scenes. It is still what the writer or the director envisions for that character. Okay, now the trap is that we assume that breakdown is some sort of model for the perfect audition, the perfect version of that character. It's like casting and the producers have built a tiny model of what they want you to replicate in your performance. No, that is not it at all. That is a huge trap that actors fall into time and time again, as evidenced by the Q&As you'll see casting directors do on social media or in person, where they talk about calling in 30 actors, 50 actors for a role, and 80% of them just do a repetition of the same thing, and it's boring and it's uninspired. So they are not looking for you to sort of replicate some stereotypical image of what is in that breakdown. So by trying to approximate those adjectives that they put into the breakdown or whatever the description might be, you're actually diluting your own uniqueness, which is the biggest trap because again, if you listen to these Q&As with casting directors, and please go search YouTube for them. The SAG-AFTRA Foundation has so many videos with professionals like that, casting directors or directors talking about the type of actors they're looking for when they're in that casting phase. There are countless social media posts that you can see from casting directors addressing all these issues, and you'll see the trends of what they are disturbed by, which is actors trying to hold themselves accountable to some imaginary standard and in the process losing themselves by not focusing on what makes you unique, your signature performance, as we like to call it. It just becomes another boring read. So this is why you always hear in some way or another casting directors and other professionals who are on that side of the camera talking about what they want to see in those auditions is simple: authenticity. Sometimes they say bold choices, but I look at that as the exact same thing, because when you're authentic, when you just rest in that confidence of who you are and what you bring to the table, and you do it with specificity, you stand out. And that seems like a bold choice compared to those other 80+% of the actors who submitted for this role who are just trying to approximate the same stereotype of the character. Now, those of you who watch this channel know that for me, the answer to this conundrum was the Sam Christensen workshop. I'm not going to sell that here. You can check out links in the show notes below, but it was mind-blowing for me when I took it 13 years ago, and it changed my career, and it really brought these concepts into focus for me, and I've never looked back. So, to go back to the playground analogy, think of your character breakdown as sort of a layout of the equipment that's on the playground. And it's sort of also including a very basic description of how to use it. Here's a slide. Here are the stairs. This is how you go down a slide, etc. And now think about when you were a kid and how you played on the playground. And if you're a parent, you've probably been to a playground recently and seen kids in action. And so think about kids on the playground. Do they follow directions? Do they always go down the slide, or do most of the kids at some point turn around and try to climb up the slide? And while they might use the monkey bars the way they were intended initially, you watch long enough and suddenly they're climbing on top of the monkey bars. And instead of just walking across that sort of bouncy bridge, now they're sort of trying to balance themselves on the outside of the railing, doing dangerous things, but being creative. So given the initial conditions of this equipment and the boundary around the playground, they start exploring all the possibilities. It's truly inspiring if you think about it. But then imagine that one kid who is the rule follower who starts shouting, hey guys, play right. Stick to the instructions. You're doing it wrong. And then they proceed to use the equipment in a very predictable manner, and it starts to not resemble play. Guess what? That rule follower is you. At least it is you if you're trying so hard to approximate what you're reading in that character description and then to put that into your self-tape. Casting never asked you to do that. Again, go back and listen to these Q&As. Track them down. They are everywhere. They want you to bring you to the performance. What is your unique way of playing on that playground? They've given you the initial conditions. They know that that's necessary. They've given you the boundaries around the equipment, which, side note, also includes all of your script analysis. All your knowledge about the tone of the show, the genre, the network, the showrunner, the director, etc. That, combined with the character breakdown that casting has provided, that is like being provided the blueprint to this playground, along with the boundaries and the specific equipment. But how you play is 100% up to you. It's time to let loose and have fun to play. And don't be that kid that is constantly looking for approval from mom, looking over their shoulder. Mom, watch me. Watch me, mom. Watch. Are you watching, mom? Trust the work you did to establish this picture of what the playground is and where the boundaries are. Trust that work and then let go and just be yourself. Oh, and here's one last note. Be careful after the experience of being on that playground, after the self-tape. Be careful about being so self-critical. I mean, think about it. On the way home, are those kids thinking about all the mistakes they made playing on the playground that day? No. They're just sad they left. And if asked, did you have fun? Would you like to go back tomorrow? 100% of the time, they're like, yep, I would love to go back tomorrow. And yet that doesn't quite sound like our relationship to auditions, but it could be. So in short, be careful that you don't turn that breakdown into some holy grail. See what I did there? In fact, the next audition you get, try to not even read the character breakdown until you've looked at the script and spent some time with your character. See where your instincts are taking you before you go back and look at that character breakdown. And now sometimes there is actually useful information in those breakdowns. Maybe it's the idiosyncrasies of the showrunner, or there's something specific about this scene or this character because they've gone through multiple passes looking for the person they're going to cast. So it might say things like, this scene needs to clip along because it's the cold open to our show. I actually just saw that one recently. Or this director loves understated performances. Or on this show, they welcome improv. So of course, if you see helpful information like that, use it to your advantage. But when it comes to that physical description and the adjectives about the character, just be careful. That is likely old information, and even if it's not, your job is not to try to create some bad approximation of that stereotype. And trust me, if you start to heed my advice, the thing that might start happening is you might start enjoying auditioning. Gasp. If you approach each new audition as a brand new playground, and if you see your job description as simply to play on that playground, well, then it stands to reason that you might actually have fun, even without supervision. Which in this analogy just means like getting feedback from the casting director. So go play. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on set.